In our previous lectures, which we were having it, we have talked about Thallophyta. Now, Thallophyta is a group which is strictly marine in nature, and the structure of the plant body is thallus-like, and it had three categories which we have discussed. One was Phaeophyta that are brown algae, Rhodophyta, which are also called as red algae, Chlorophyta, which are also called as green algae. Under these headings, we have dealt what are the different types of habitat, whether they are marine, freshwater, what are the different shapes of the chloroplast which are present in all these different types of algae. Then what are the storage materials which are present in different types of the algae, and their mode of reproduction, whether it is its sexual or sexual mode of reproduction. All these topics we have covered under the heading of Thallophyta. Now the next part, the next category of Plantae kingdom, Thallophyta, and the next one comes is Bryophyta. Now these Bryophyta, if you talk about evolutionary wise, they are the first plant to invade Earth. They were the first plant to colonize on the surface, on the terrestrial part of the Earth. So Thallophyta was strictly marine. When we talk about Bryophyta, they are the first plants which were growing on the terrestrial terrain. And but obvious, as the evolution has been taking place from the water to the terrestrial form, these bryophytas, they used to grow in cool, shady and damp places, and they used to be also called as amphibians of plant kingdom because of two reasons. First, because they are growing in the shady and damp areas, moist areas. That was one reason. And the second reason, they required water for their fertilization, for the movement of enterozoites from the male part to the female part, that is from the antheridium to archegonium. They require water. That is why they are called as amphibians of plant kingdom. Now, though the plants have come now with the Bryophyta, the plants have invaded the terrestrial terrain, but still these plants, these Bryophyta plants, they do not have any kind of vascular system. They were not having xylem or phloem for the conduction of food and water. So they were non-vascular plants. That is why once there was no xylem and phloem, chances of these plants to grow very tall was not at all possible. So they were small plants, but the betterment or the evolutionary part was that they are now growing on the land also, along with the water which was occupied by Thallophyta. Now let's talk about Bryophyta. When we talk about the thallus organization, now these plants do not have a very well differentiated stem, root or leaf, but still the thallus-like structure which was there of the plant, they were dorsi-ventrally flattened. That means some members of these Bryophyta, they were very thin and they were just growing, they were just prostrate, they were growing on the land, and they were dorsi-ventrally flattened. Few of them, they were erect also, but very small plants which were there, were very small erection. It was not very tall plants which you can imagine. You can look into the second diagram here in this slide, which is a diagram of a funaria. Funaria, a type of moss, and these plants were erect plants, and once we see them, these plants do have root-like structures, but root-like structures. They were not performing the functions of the root. Then you can see the stem-like structure. Stem-like structure. Stem did not have xylem or phloem. So stem-like structure was there, but the function was not there. There were leaf-like structures you can see, excuse me, in it, but they were not like only for the photosynthesis. Whole of the plant was capable of going for photosynthesis. Then there's two things which will be a little new for you. The third point I'm reading: dominant phase gametophyte, Sporophyte dependent on gametophyte. Actually, what is gametophyte? Gameto means gamete and phyte means the plant body. Plant body which is capable of producing gametes, whether it is male or female, that plant body is called as gametophyte. So in case of Bryophyta, the gametophyte body part, the stage of the life cycle of the bryophyte where the gametes will be produced on the plant body, that was more dominant as compared to sporophyte. Now sporophyte means the plant part which will produce spores. So in case of this Bryophyta, both of them they existed, gametophyte as well as bryophyte. But the major part of the life of the bryophyte was spent in gametophyte stage. So formation of the gamete, that was a stage which was prolonged. Then once the gamete used to fuse, the zygote formation used to occur, which used to lead to formation of sporophyte, and then sporophyte will produce spores. Sporophyte getting produced and producing of the spore, that stage of the life in case of Bryophyta was not a very prolonged one, though it comprises of the 50% part of the life cycle of Bryophyta. So gametophyte and sporophyte, these were the two life stages of the Bryophyta. Next one. When we talk about the sexual part, the sexual reproduction part of the Bryophyta, Antheridia was the male reproductive part, which you can see that it will be a club-like structure. It will be having a stalk, then a club-like structure which will be having the presence of anthrocyte mother cells. You can see inside this the slide, which are covered with antheridial wall. This was the male structure or the male reproductive structure in case of bryophytes. The female structure, that is called as archegonium. Now archegonium used to be flask shaped structure. You can see a long neck cells are there. Then there is a ventral canal cell, you can see in the diagram, and the egg cell. Actually the egg cell is the, you can say, the female gamete which has to be fertilized. So this is a flask shaped structure. So it is archegonium. In the middle you can see the diagram of a sperm, or you can call it as anthrozoids in case of bryophytes. And these anthrozoids, they were flagellated. They had got the presence of flagella. And they have to go from the antheridia to archegonia for the fertilization. Now how does that fertilization occurs? When we proceed further, we will understand. Now once we move ahead, I'm just reading this whole slide. Zygote develops into sporophyte, as I told before, and is dependent on gametophyte and reproduces asexually by the formation of spores. Spores fall on a suitable substratum and germinate into thyroid gamete and protonema stage. That means once the spores are formed in the sporophyte and they get dehiscence out, that means they get spread out after getting dried, they will land up on the substratum. As soon as they will land up on the substratum, they will start creating a tubular structure. And that tubular structure will be growing and it will be branching. So that type of tubular structure we will call it as protonema. And this protonema, on this type of tubular structure, leafy outlets will start coming out, which will further grow into a small, you can say a kind of a small thallus-like structure, or it can grow into a small erect structure, which will be called as gametophyte. This will be more clear once we touch the different topics. Now this is a general idea about the bryophyte. Bryophyte divided into two more categories. One is liverworts and another one is mosses. When we talk about liverworts are, if you consider bryophyte as a bigger category, liverworts are less developed. They are not so much evolved. On the contrary, mosses, Funaria is the example of the mosses, that is more developed than the liverworts. These liverworts, I'm just going through the characteristic features. You can see the photograph of a liverwort. This is a type of a plant called as Riccia. Now what is happening in this? Just see, let us look into the characteristic features of it. The plant body is thalloid, that means thallus-like. They do not have got the differentiation of root, stem and leaf. Not even root-like structure, stem-like structure or leaf-like structures are present. Dorsi-ventrally flattened and dichotomously branched. Dorsi-ventrally flattened, that we all know, they are very thin and they will be just growing prostrate on the ground. Dichotomously branched means they will be having two notches. You can see at the top they have got a two notch structure, two lobe like structure. Then once they will grow from a single branch, two branches will be formed. Then that two branches, once they grow, again they will be divided into two. So two like that is dichotomously branched structure. Some leafy members have tiny leaf-like appendages in two rows. You can see in the diagram. Here they are brownish in color. You can see leaf-like structures present on the middle part of it, something looking like a midrib-like structure. But this is a kind of a characteristic feature of the liverwort. Some of the members of the liverwort, not all. When we talk about reproduction, vegetative reproduction in case of liverworts, that happens with the help of this cup-like structure. Again in the photograph you can see these cup-like structures, we call them as gymma cup. And what will happen, these gymma cups, they have good sustainability. They can withstand the unfavorable conditions. So whole of the thallus might get decayed out, but these gymma cups, they will remain intact. And once the favorable condition comes, they can give rise to a new thallus. So this was one of the mode of vegetative reproduction in case of liverworts. Next category, here you can see the whole sexual reproduction happening in a plant called as Markensia. Markensia again is an example of liverworts. You can start seeing that this is actually a cycle, so we have to start from somewhere. So we will pick up this cycle from this male thallus and female thallus. You can look into the diagram. Female thallus and male thallus. Now once it is male thallus, it will be responsible for the formation of antheridium, and the female thallus will be responsible for the formation of archegonium. Now Markensia, this particular diagram is especially of Markensia, and in Markensia the reproductive structures, they do not grow on the thallus. On the contrary, they grow on a erected surfaces which are called as anthridiophores and archegoniophores. So anthridia is growing on anthridiophores and archegonium is growing on archegoniophore. You can see into the next diagram. Now both the parts, antheridium as well as archegonium, they are not projected outside the plant body. They are present inside the thallus of the plant body. Thallus means inside the anthridiophore and inside archegoniophore. So antheridia, that is the club shaped structure, is present inside the anthridiophore, and archegonium is present inside the archegoniophore, and this antheridium will form the sperm, that is anthrozoid, which is flagellated. And once the water is present, now water, how does it happen? It's a very you can say a kind of a very interesting thing, that whenever rain comes, a rain droplet behaves as a transferring medium of these anthrozoids from the male reproductive part to the female reproductive part. So with the help of that water, that anthrozoid will swim from the male reproductive part till the female reproductive part, that is the archegonium, and it will enter the neck canal cell, which we have discussed in the previous slides. Now once the sperm enters the neck canal cell, it will go inside it, where you can see egg cell which is written. It's going to go there and it will fertilize it. Remember, all these things are happening inside this archegoniophore. Once the zygote will be formed, fertilization will happen, zygote will be formed. Then you can look into the next step. Zygote will start developing into an embryo. Then this embryo gets converted into sporophyte. Sporophyte will always have three structures. One is foot, which will help the sporophyte anchor itself into the gametophyte. Then a little neck-like structure, which is called as seta, and a capsule structure, which will be having presence of spore mother cells, which will later on develop into spores. Again reminding, foot, seta and capsule, these are three parts of the sporophytes, but in case of Marchantia, all the three things are embedded inside this, still embedded inside this archegoniophore. So they are not projecting out. Next category when we will discuss of funaria, it will be little different circumstances than this. So it is present inside. Once the spores are formed, in the capsules, you can see there are some hair-like structures which are called as elaters. These elaters will dry out and they will force open this capsule and the spores will be released. You can the spore mother cells will go for meiosis. Meiosis means they will become from diploid to haploid, and then elaters will help in the spreading or the dispersal of the spores from the capsule. You can see in the next diagram. Then these spores will germinate, and these spores means 50% of the spores will be male spores, 50% will be of the female spores. So they will develop back into male thallus or the female thallus, and the whole cycle will continue. Some of the spores will definitely go for even vegetative reproduction also. So in this case, vegetative reproduction is with the help of liver, with the help of Jimma cup. So that Jimma will again help in the propagation of the more types of the liverworts. So this cycle continues. But bryophytes, they can grow profusely only in rainy seasons, in monsoon seasons, because they need water for the transferring, as we have seen, for the transferring of anthrozoids from the male reproductive part to the female reproductive part. Okay. I'm just reading it out what we have discussed. Sex organs are antheridia and archegonia, and plant may be monoecious or dioecious in case of Marchantia. Now Marchantia, monoecious and dioecious means they are present on the same thallus. Inside one thallus, you will be having male gamete as well as female reproductive part. Dioecious means two different thallus are there, one with male reproductive part, another thallus with the female reproductive part. Next point, the zygote formed as a result of fertilization develops into an embryo which give rise to a sporophyte that we have seen. The spores on the liberation into the thalloid gametophyte. That means you can see, just reverting back the slide, you can see the spores, they get converted into thallus-like gametophyte, which later on develops further. That is the sexual reproduction part. Mosses will be our next topic. So in our next video, when we talk about the next category of the Bryophyta, which is more advanced than the liverwort, we will be discussing about the mosses, and the example we will be taking is funaria. For today, this much it's there. Thank you.